Thank you all for coming to the most recent edition of the Media Ethics Initiative. My name is Scott Stroud, a faculty member in Communication Studies. And today we have a special treat. All of these are great talks, talking about ethics and various parts of communication practice. But today we have an expert practitioner who's also taught in college classrooms. So she can be as boring as academics like me and as exciting and knowledgeable about people who are actually out there doing this stuff. So it'll be a neat, different angle on the ethics of communication. Today's topic's on the ethics of communication in public relations. And we have Kathleen Lucente, the founder and president of Red Fan Communications, a PR firm right down the road from UT Austin, so local, based in Austin here, talking to us today. And let me say a few things about Kathleen and her accomplishments. She's had a successful and award-winning career working for companies such as IBM, JPMorgan, Ketchum Worldwide, and other global brands and agencies. But as if this wasn't enough, she moved to Austin before it got all hip and big and full of traffic and decided to take on a new challenge. She founded here in Austin Red Fan Communications, which is a unique public relations firm that's helped countless companies clarify their visions, tell their stories to the public, and establish lasting relationships with clients. She serves on several boards and donates much of her time and her staff's time to local nonprofits that have tangible impact throughout the community, including our own Trail of Lights, the ABC Kite Fest, which I just learned has been going on for 90-some years here in Austin. So these are very important community traditions. The Health Alliance for Austin Musicians and the Susan G. Komen Foundation. So Kathleen is one of these people I like to put on the stage. She's been involved in a lot, and she has a lot of insight into the tough decisions that make up the ethical practice of public relations. So join me in welcoming Kathleen Lucente to our stage.
The time to come here today, and I look forward to talking about a bunch, but I also look forward to answering a whole bunch of your questions at the end. So we're going to cover a couple of things, but before we get into that, thank you once again for such a lovely intro. That's me sitting on a couch somewhere. So yeah, I started my career as a high-tech journalist. I got my master's degree at Boston College. I taught freshman English there, and then I jumped into journalism. So I started on the journalism side, and then I made this decision to go to the dark side, as that's what they say in journalism. So when a lot of journalists say, oh my gosh, I could never move from being a journalist to going into PR, I decided I could do that. And the reason why I decided that was because I had lots of PR people coming in to pitch stories to me when I was living in Boston, writing about high tech. And I would see these PR people come in, and some of them were just amazing. And they really took interest in their client, and they understood what it took to tell a story. And there were others that it was really clear to me that they didn't really care about their client. They were on the phone with other clients. They were disrespectful. And I got to see both in front of me. And I thought, I understand what it takes to do create a good story. And I know how to be a great counsel to somebody. And I think I could do this. So just so everyone understands, I do not have a PR degree. So I jumped from my master's degree in literature to going into journalism to then going into PR. So not everyone takes a straight path to where they're going to go, but I think it's important to recognize that. Oops, here I go with my clicker. I am the president of Red Fan Communications. I started this 10 years ago. We're just going into our 10th year. This is the building. Some of you may pass it. It's a historic building built in 1892. We have 12 employees in this building. We have a former Bloomberg reporter in New York, another great guy who worked with me in New York City, in San Diego. 2 of my staff members are here today. You can say hi to them over there. 25 years experience. So I started down this path of, like I said, jumping over. And the way I got into my first PR job was Motorola here in Austin, Texas, called Cunningham Communication and said, we love you guys in Boston, but you guys cannot write. You need to hire this young woman who is a tech journalist, and she can make a microprocessor tangible to a grandmother as well as respectable to an engineer. And so that is how I wound up in my first PR job, and I was overseeing a $1.5 million account. I was in charge of the microprocessor, 68,000 microprocessor division, and I was also working with gamers who were really into programming to that chip and learning about them, and writing and getting publicity that consumers could understand to make chips tangible to everyday life. So that's kind of what happened. From there, I've gone all over. So I worked at IBM Research, Ketchum Public Relations, and then when I was at IBM Research, the whole IPO thing was going on. And I thought, I'm at IBM Research, and I could do this forever. I'm itching to go do that investor relations stuff. And so I decided to join a boutique PR firm in New York City and help companies go public. So I worked with companies from Israel to San Francisco and beyond, helping to launch them, and primarily in the tech space, just so you're familiar with that. After Peppercom, what happened was JPMorgan and Chase were merging, and I got this call from a headhunter, and they said, can you please come talk to us? And I said, well, why would I want to go to work at a bank? They said, well, we want you to run Lab Morgan. Lab Morgan is an incubator, and we want you to help launch technologies that we're using in the bank, launch them as new companies. So a derivatives platform we're using, we're going to turn it into a company. We're putting a CEO ahead of it, and we're going to launch that. Will you do all the PR for that? Did that for a while. Guess what? Next thing I know, I'm asked to go to Hong Kong. Well, I've been married a year. I said to my husband, I'm going to go to Hong Kong. Is that all right? Head off to Hong Kong. Supposed to be there for 3 months. It turned into 4.5 years. He did come with me eventually. I was in charge of a 4-way merger in terms of communications. There was a new chairman there. He had worked at Goldman Sachs. He said, I have never been in the press before in my entire life. I'm 53 years old. I'm putting myself in your hands. And I thought, oh, God. But I did it. I said, okay, if you put your money where your mouth is and you actually really build this out, I can put that out to the press. I can make sure that we look great. And so I was in charge of 18 countries. I rejiggered our staff there. They said China was really important. We had not a single person on our staff that spoke Mandarin. I made a change on that right away. So this will give you a little bit of background. There's lots more there. But if you want to talk to me about career, always happy to. Today I'm going to bring us to 3 things. We're going to talk about media and journalist relations, account client management, and crisis communications. There's a lot of overlap in the 3, so we might get a little blurred. But the reason is that crisis communications, account management, and media often collide. So we're going to jump right to it. So does anyone know what an embargoed pitch is? Do you know what that is? You do? Okay. An embargoed pitch is when, if you're a media relations person and you have a juicy piece of news, you want to talk to reporters and you want to say to them, hey, I know this press release is going to come out on Wednesday next week. I'm willing to give you the news in advance, give you interviews, photography, everything you need, as long as you sign something promising you will not run that story until the press release hits on Wednesday. This is really important. You can't only do this with people you trust. I'll give you an example. TechCrunch, everybody wants, if you're a technology client, everybody wants to be in TechCrunch. It's the hottest thing, right? Pando Daily is very competitive with TechCrunch. Pando Daily naturally does not care from an ethics standpoint. They will break your embargo just to get the first dibs. And we've seen that repeatedly. As a result, companies don't trust the journalists there. So they've ruined their reputation by doing that. So if I'm a tech company, even if that journalist is great, I know that the editor over at Pando Daily is going to be giving that journalist pressure to break that ethical relationship and run the story. So TechCrunch does not do that. They abide by it. So that's a really important thing to understand. You don't do that all the time, but if you have imagine you have a company that's going to be going public, you're going to be really careful with that news. You're not going to offer it to someone else. There are many journalists also that will not accept embargoes, like Bloomberg will not accept an embargo. They also don't accept gifts. They do not accept gifts. You can bring a gold pen over and they will hand it right back to you. There's plenty of journalists that will accept gifts. It's part of their DNA, their rules. They will not do that. So that's their highest ethic, so they cannot be bought. Competitor schemes is a really interesting one. When I was in Hong Kong, this is always really interesting to find out what happens. You know, a lot of times it's not the PR department that's causing the problem, it's the bankers or the young person on the equity floor that gets a call from a journalist and decides, cool, I get to talk to a reporter. Awesome. Well, one day I got a phone call from a reporter at Bloomberg, Rob Stewart. He calls me up and he says, hey, I hear this big deal that you have going on with Goldman Sachs and a bank out of Singapore. I hear that you guys are really flubbing it over at JPMorgan, and you're not getting all the deal, and they're really leading the deal. And I said, where are you getting this information? I have a source. Okay. I said, well, you know what? Let me talk to my bankers. Called them up. Are you guys flubbing the deal? No. I give them the story. They said, what? They were furious. I said, okay, well, I'm going to call him back. Is it okay if I bring this reporter up to the equity floor and show him the screen to show him how the deal is getting booked? Absolutely. Full transparency. So we took that reporter on the elevator from JPMorgan. We brought him straight up, showed him the screen. It was very clear that we were leading the deal and that Goldman Sachs had this much and we had this much booked. What happened? That person at Goldman Sachs was never trusted again. He was blacklisted from Bloomberg. That was it, right? So ethics, sometimes you get these weird things that happen. And another great example was one time I was sitting at Ketchum in New York and I was managing a company, a systems integrator out of Fairfax, Virginia, and I got a press release sent to me by a journalist, and it said CSC, you've seen that logo here in town, was a press release written, CSC just won this deal. My client had already told me that they won the deal. Well, how can that be? I'm confused. So I called the CEO down in Fairfax, and I said, I just got the weirdest press release. It says, this company won the deal. He said, oh, send it over. What? This is crazy. Anyway, lawyers got involved, all that. Turns out it was a bogus press release that someone in the sales department had drafted and sent out to reporters. Sometimes people are so desperate they'll do whatever it takes to tip a deal. Well, that was one of the weirdest of all, right? Very strange to see that kind of stuff happen. So false news, great example. We're talking about fake news all the time. False news, when I'm talking about false news, the example I would say is sitting at, once again, at JPMorgan. I have a team of 25 people, but I will highlight for you that when you are moving up in public relations, it is really important to stay in touch with reporters because you actually know what's going on. A lot of times senior people move up and they kind of they're flying around, they don't really know what's going on with the press. I make it a point to know what's going on with reporters in my industry. So get this phone call, and I look in the Bloomberg terminal, and I see an article is already out that says that 2 people, senior people, have been fired at JPMorgan. Well, Bloomberg has really high ethics. I think I've highlighted that for you. And they basically have a point of always checking their background on any lead. They won't just run something. So I called my buddy Rob Stewart again, and I said, Rob, this is not even true. I just talked to HR. These people still work here, so I'm not really sure what's going on. He said, I have a really solid lead on this. I can back it up. So we're going back and forth. Come on, Rob, I'm the head of PR at JPMorgan, and I'm telling you that's not accurate. He goes, Kathleen, I'm gonna have to talk to my boss, and then I'll get right back to you. Well, this is the weirdest one, because we've always had a very transparent conversation. Calls me back, tells me, by the way, I've already run up to the head of HR, I've already run up to the head of the investment bank. I've gotten a phone call by now by this person, one of the people who's in the article, saying, my life is ruined, I'm in this article, it looks like I was fired, my reputation is ruined, I need more stock. Which I'm not in charge of, by the way, I'm not in charge of getting people stock. So I thought, well, this is all getting crazy. I'm feeling bad for him, oh, my wife is crying. I mean, he's going drama, big time drama. Rob calls me back eventually, and he says, Pierre is the actual source. The guy who's calling you crying is the one who created the story. Wow. Let's just say that gentleman did not get the stock. And so really a big problem. Final example, I would say, a little bit interesting. It kind of falls in this, but I had a situation, Australia, when you're sitting in Hong Kong, Australia is really far away. Imagine I'm in charge of 18 countries. So I get a call. This was kind of a crazy situation. I get a call, and it was the bankers across Australia and Sydney were competing to raise money for for cancer. So it was like, hey, if you do this, I'll shave my mustache, I'll shave half my mustache, half my beard, whatever. Well, I get a call from a journalist saying one of the top guys on the equity floor has offered, he's drinking and he's offered to shave his entire body. So I think, all right, well, luckily we have cameras on the equity floor so I can see, and I'm in Hong Kong, right? This is in Sydney. I'm not going to fly there and find out if he's really planning on doing this, right? Call him, talk to him, and I find out that this was a lie. This is also not true. And I was able to at least bust it before it actually happened. It was a competitor trying to make someone look bad. So these are the weird things in PR that sometimes you're up against. But building strong editorial relationships really, really matters, because you can see in all of these situations, I was able to basically stop something, or at least put things in perspective and get to the facts. And that's really what matters. Really, really important. So that's the media part of it. Account and client management. So when I think of that, when I think of account and client management, the first thing we look at is, and my agency is built this way, not all agencies are the same. So if you grow up in a big agency environment, you understand that if you're going to cut a deal with a major client, like say it's National Instruments or something like that, you're not going to then also have a deal with their competitor. So an exclusive arrangement matters. And there are PR agencies that might represent restaurants, and they might take on 25 Italian restaurants. Well, that means every time we talk to Bon Appetit, we've got to throw somebody under the bus, because who's going to get the press? So my feeling is I like to have exclusive relationships. I also charge more if it's exclusive, because I can't go after those other things, right? So I'm focused on you. I'm focused on making you successful as a client, and we expect that to be mutual. We expect the client to also not have any relationships with other PR agencies. We are the only one representing them, unless, for example, with JPMorgan, we had, a New York agency, we had an agency for China, and I actually had an agency for Southeast Asia. But they really had clear boundaries and understanding of how that was going to work. So that's really important. The other thing that happens a lot of times when you're managing clients is that you have a scope of work. So when you sign up with a client, you have, how are we going to measure success? You decide that together. Just getting a lot of press clips might not be what is going to be successful. Maybe it's something else. So understanding, are they trying to get more leads to their website? Are they trying to have more face-to-face engagement with journalists? Are they trying to create events that have press around them? What are the ways you're going to do that? If a client starts asking outside of the scope, that becomes scope creep. If you're young and you're in an agency, a lot of times you want to please a client. They might be calling and saying, hey, do you mind just writing this memo for me? Do you mind adding, I just lost my salesperson. Can you make some sales calls? Well, what's going to happen? If you eat into your budget that they've given you, and then at the end of the month they say, hey, you didn't reach your goals, you're going to say, well, but you made me do all this other work. Well, I was expecting you to still do the other work in the scope of work. So we always have to go back. You do a change agenda. You send it over to the client, say, either you're going to pay more for that piece that you've asked for, no problem, we're happy to do it, we say yes. Or here's the scope, we have to change what the goals are, because if you ask us to use the money that you've given us to do something differently, we need to then measure ourselves and your success differently. So this is something, if you're going into this industry, you have to know about and be able to go to your manager and say, I feel like I'm having scope creep, I feel like the client's trying to move me into a different direction, and be able to manage that. Hiring the right type of client and standing behind your employees is super important in our industry. I had a guy who was having a major crisis in Atlanta. It was a pharmaceutical company, and he showed up, and first of all, I don't like doing crisis communications for people I don't already know and have a really strong relationship with, but it was clear that he didn't want to have a lawyer present, didn't want to have the right people present, wanted to move fast and loose, didn't want to work the way we work, didn't have the values that we have. We are not going to make up lies to make you look better. We're not going to do crazy stuff, right? So, the wrong client is out. Just knowing that you're going to hire the right type of client matters a lot. You also need to know when you're going to say goodbye to a client. If a client just starts to do things that are unethical or just feels bad, we all of our contracts have a 30-day out clause mutually, right? Client can end relationship with us, we can end relationship with them. Try not to do that too often. We have a set of questions that we ask as we're screening clients, and those screening of questions help us as a team identify, are there any red flags we're seeing with this client? How they answer these questions? Where do they want to be? How do they want to measure success? Do they have a point person that's going to be managing our relationship? Those types of things. So that's important. Just make sure. I think the other interesting one is fire in the belly is one of our values at Redfin. Having a fire in your belly. And what that means is if you're not passionate about working for your client, you might have 5 clients or 4 clients, there's probably one of those that you love more. That just happens, It's like you have 4 kittens and one is just way cuddlier than the other, right? So this is you have to be able to give them all equal care and feeding, and you have to be able to really get passionate and wrap your head around what's going on in their industry. And clients love you if they feel that way. If you really care about them, you care about their success, it comes across. If you're just dialing it in, they're going to know that. If you're just showing up and like, yeah, I'm going to write a press release, whatever. If you're like that, you don't belong in communications. You need to be really on fire. Be really passionate about this. It's not for the faint of heart. Crisis communications. So you guys have seen I've been in this industry for 25 years. I lived in New York City, saw the second plane hit for 9/11. I handled crisis communications for JPMorgan through 9/11. I went to Hong Kong and handled SARS there. So there's a lot. I'm very familiar. During the corporate challenge in Singapore, we had a young man catch a guy who died in his arms. I had to deal with that. I have seen a lot of different crises and handle them in each situation. I think the most important thing you have to realize about crisis communications is you have to have the right partners in place. You have to put the right team together. You have to have a lawyer, usually an external lawyer as well as an internal lawyer, that is familiar with crisis communications. You first of all have to have a crisis communications plan. So you don't start a crisis communications plan when the crisis is happening. Has anyone taken crisis communications before here? So the way crisis communications works is just your company is healthy and happy. You sit down and you have a powwow with the senior managers and you think, we're going to put white paper all around the room and we're going to write down every single possible disaster that could happen. You name it. Product failure, somebody who gets fired at a top senior level for doing something really outrageous. We've seen that with Uber and a whole bunch of other folks lately, right? A blog comes out outing a company for sexual harassment. I mean, it goes on and on and on. You've got to kind of be prepared. And then you have to say, if any of these things happened, what would be our chain of command and how we would handle it? And communications has to be in there. Your COO, your CEO, your head of HR, and your attorney. Having the right attorney is super important, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. But first, I'm going to go through. Being quick to respond to reporters is very, very important. That doesn't mean you have to be a know-it-all. It means you have to be able to, if reporters start calling, you have to be able to say, we are aware, we're looking into it, and you have to have a holding pattern statement. You also have to have a plan for how you're going to be communicating with your staff, how you're going to be communicating with your partners externally and customers, so that it's clear that you're covering all constituents. It is a big effort, by the way. Honestly, when I was in New York City, I think I worked around the clock during 9/11. And I didn't mind, because it was a really terrible situation for everybody involved, you can imagine. But we also came together as a community both in Hong Kong and in New York around crises. Sometimes good things come out of these. I'll give you an example. With JPMorgan in New York during 9/11, you don't want to be the company that comes out and says, we're going to donate $5 million. Look at us, right? That's very me-focused. And all the banks were feeling that same way. They have a lot of money. How can they be respectful and do something that's honorable? So we brought all the banks together. We're talking Morgan Stanley, JPMorgan, Citibank at the time, all of these came together and created a fund and said, we have all come together to do something for the city. JPMorgan also went the extra mile, and actually Morgan Stanley had all of their servers get pretty much killed off in when the blackout, so we actually gave them our servers in New Jersey so they could continue to keep their, so we were friends with our competition is my point, right? We were like frenemies that came together and said, how do we do that? And then in Hong Kong during SARS, the ultimate compliment was I was working with a crisis team, and Goldman Sachs, the head of communications at Goldman Sachs, called me, kind of tail between his legs, and he said, I know you and I aren't the best of friends. We compete pretty fiercely for the press coverage we want, but whatever you guys are doing over there on that crisis communications, can we please have a copy? Because we are behind the 8 ball. And we came together, and I gave him our crisis plan and walked him through what we were doing and how we were working with our employees. That was everything from having therapists on site in New York. There are people who did not want to come back to New York City. Once they got out of the city and went to New Jersey or Connecticut, they're like, I am not coming back to work. And we had to have online therapists to kind of help people, we had to make it possible for them to feel comfortable, and you can't force people. You just got to work with people where they're at. Same thing with SARS. It's airborne. No one knew what it was at the time. We had to have medical experts that we flew in, and we had to have what we felt were trusted medical experts, US medical experts and experts from London, that we just felt these are people on our team. We can really help people understand what's really going on here. And that was very helpful because you can't open the windows in a high rise. And so if you think it's coming through the air conditioning and you're getting poisoned, which is what the original thought was, you got people in panic mode, okay? So that's really important. HR experts also came together, I noticed, around SARS. They all said, you know what? We're all dealing with the same thing. Let's all get together from all these different banks in Hong Kong and share best practices. And so sometimes you're not alone, in these situations. You actually have friends who can come together and really support each other. So I think that's very, very important to recognize. The one thing I will tell you on crisis communications that's important is that sometimes things don't work out the way you want. When I was in New York during the Enron, does anyone know what Enron is? Okay, good. You're learning old case studies, really old case studies. But this is an interesting situation. So we talked about this team at the top, right? You have to have your attorney and all that. And my boss had gone to the table and said, I think, so JPMorgan Chase had a very small role in Enron, but it had a role. And the attorneys, they said, we don't want to talk about it, let's not bring it up, let's just hold off on it. The truth always comes out. And if you're in PR, you are going to burn your relationships if you don't tell the truth. Because they're never going to call you. Reporters are going to say, yeah, you're just a talking head. You don't tell the truth. And so you have to have tough conversations with reporters. And so we did not, as a bank, move forward and admit any involvement. And about 6 months, and so everyone else took the brunt. About 6 months later, it came out, our involvement. Our involvement was this big, but it felt like it was this big from a PR standpoint. So that can be very challenging for a head of communications when you're, legally, you have to do what's right, what the lawyers are saying, and sometimes we don't all agree in these crisis communications situations. What I can tell you is that the PR department was able to tell reporters, look, our hands were tied by legal rules, and we are sorry that this is it, but we can tell you the facts. Just be factual. And we were able to make inroads with those journalists. We also made sure to have cocktail parties with our journalists, invite them to our homes, and really make it happen. I think the final example I'm going to give you is an example that happened at IBM that you have to be careful of. Sometimes if you get too close to a journalist is there to write a story. They want all the juice. And we had a PR person at IBM that was doing a piece for Fortune magazine. And it was on Lou Gerstner at the time. And we had rules, how much he wanted in the press about his personal life and how much he was willing to stay close. He doesn't necessarily want people showing up at his church or wherever it may be. And so he had kind of more of a private life and wanted to kind of put forth what he wanted to put forth and talk business. the PR person kept inviting that journalist over to her home and talking about how close she was with the chairman and how cool she was. Let's just say that backfired. When that article came out, that person got demoted. And the entire PR department across IBM was told, you are not allowed to talk to Fortune magazine. If you want to do a story, you have to talk to Forbes. For me, as a PR professional, I'm not a big believer in, I think it was our mistake, not the journalist's mistake. And that did not, as a PR professional, that did not sit well with me. Didn't make me leave the company, didn't make me freak out, but I'm just saying, as a young PR professional, I felt like that ethically was not really the right thing, that we should try to do our best. And I've done that with many journalists. You know, someone gets something a little bit wrong, or an executive gets a little bit mad. You don't just say, forget it, we're never going to talk to them again. You figure out how you're going to make things work. And it's a relationship game. So I think that is my talk. I hope you guys enjoyed it.